The dining room was alive with noise. Forks scraped against china, laughter rose in bursts, and overlapping conversations tangled in the air like loose strings. At the far end of the long oak table, Eleanor Chen sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her plate, half full, had grown cold. No one noticed. She had been here before, always at the edge of her family's gatherings, always the quiet one. Her nieces and nephews leaned toward one another, animated, their voices sharp with ambition, stocks, promotions, new houses, divorces, gossip, life as they knew it spun fast and loud. And then there was Eleanor. "Pass the wine, please," she murmured. No one heard her. Her niece leaned across, laughing, to refill her husband's glass instead. Eleanor's own glass remained empty, the light catching only on the faint tremor in her hand. She pressed her fingers tighter together, the way she always did when she felt invisible. Auntie Eleanor, harmless, boring, a shadow. She remembered hearing those exact words once, whispered by her eldest niece in the kitchen years ago, when Eleanor had walked in too soon. They thought she hadn't heard. But she had. Words like that do not leave the bones. The clamour rose. Her nephew, a man in his 40s with too much confidence for his own good, raised his voice over the din. "I swear librarians must have the easiest jobs. What do you even do all day, Auntie? Just stamp books and shush people?" The table erupted in laughter. A dull burn spread across Eleanor's chest. She forced a thin smile, the kind practiced over decades, the kind that told everyone she was fine. It was easier to let them laugh, easier to disappear. "I read," she said softly, though no one caught it. In truth, she had read more than any of them could imagine. She had read their ledgers, the rare manuscripts smuggled into collections, the auction house catalogues where a single misplaced comma could shift millions. She had read silence, the kind that told her more about people than their words ever did. But here in this room, she was just Auntie Eleanor, the quiet librarian. Her brother, now grey-haired and still stubbornly domineering, lifted his fork. "Don't tease your aunt. She's been steady for us, always there." Eleanor smiled faintly at that, though even his defense came with a tone that reduced her to reliable furniture, a chair, a table, something useful, but never extraordinary. She lowered her gaze to her plate, the roast beef blurred in her vision. "They don't see me, they never did." For a moment her mind slipped back, as it often did, to another table, smaller, lonelier, a lifetime ago. Her husband had been gone only 3 weeks then. Her daughter, 6 years old, sat across from her with wide, frightened eyes. Eleanor had poured every ounce of strength she had left into pretending things would be okay. It was then she had taken the job at the library, a quiet sanctuary to hide her grief. But grief had turned to resolve. The silence of books had not been silence at all. They had whispered to her, taught her how to calculate risk, how to listen, how to trade. They had taught her survival, and from survival she had built an empire. No one at this table knew. Her empire was hidden between leather spines and brittle pages, in secret auctions and anonymous trades. The world knew her as the Raven, a shadow in the rare manuscript world, feared and respected. Yet at this table she was invisible. "Isn't that right, Auntie?" Her nephew's voice jolted her back. She had no idea what he'd asked. His smirk told her the question was designed to amuse everyone else, not her. "Yes," she answered simply, giving them what they wanted. Laughter again. She let it roll past her, as she always did. Inside, however, something stirred. A shift, faint but undeniable. Perhaps it was the years pressing down, or perhaps it was the realization that time was running shorter than she liked. She stared at her hands, veined and delicate, resting atop the tablecloth, hands that had shelved books, carried boxes, turned pages into profit, hands that had built an invisible empire in the shadows. Her family didn't know, not yet, but soon they would. Eleanor raised her eyes, the corners of her mouth curling into a smile that was almost secretive. Around her, the noise continued unchecked, their voices weaving stories of money and status. They didn't see her watching, they never did. That will change, she thought. One day you'll see me, not as a shadow, but as the light that built an empire you could never imagine. For the first time in years, the thought didn't ache. It warmed her. She lifted her fork, slowly, deliberately, and took a bite. The world around her did not know it yet, but the story of Auntie Eleanor, the boring librarian, was only just beginning. At the library, the world was hushed. Rows of shelves, stretched like soldiers standing at eternal attention, the air heavy with the musk of old paper and the faint tang of dust. To most, this little corner of the city library was nothing but a sleepy refuge for the forgotten, low funding, flickering bulbs, books that hadn't been borrowed in years. To Eleanor Chen, it was an empire disguised as silence. She moved slowly down the aisles, her hand trailing along cracked leather spines. Each book was a heartbeat, a clue, a secret, and she knew how to listen. "Afternoon, Miss Chen," called one of the regulars, a young man studying for exams. She smiled gently. Afternoon. He never saw her linger in the back, where a locked cabinet hid volumes too precious for casual eyes. The library board thought she was overprotective. They didn't know those books were her windows into another life. Her mind slipped back to the beginning. It was 1974, and Eleanor had just buried her husband. She remembered standing on the porch of their small house, her daughter asleep inside, her heart hollow with grief. Bills pressed against her like cold stones. She had nothing but a widow's pension and fear. At the library, her first night shift had been agony. The silence was unbearable, a mirror of her own loneliness. But then, as she shelved a stack of returned books, she pulled out a ledger, accidentally misplaced in the wrong section. It wasn't a library book at all. It was a dealer's record of a private auction. Eleanor had opened it, and suddenly she saw numbers that made her pulse quicken. A handwritten note in the margins spoke of a rare manuscript, a 16th century medical text that had sold for 10 times its estimate. Something in her stirred. Books, she realized, weren't just for reading, they were currency. From that night forward, she listened more closely. When wealthy patrons whispered in the reading room, she memorized. When academics dropped hints about rare finds, she noted every word. And when collectors came to her, trusting her librarian's discretion, she became more than a keeper of books. She became a keeper of secrets. By the late 1980s, she was no longer just Eleanor Chen, the widow librarian. In hushed circles across the globe, another name had begun to spread. The Raven. No one knew her face. No one could trace her transactions. She built her empire in shadows, buying and selling manuscripts under a veil of silence. A letter signed by the Raven could move millions across borders unseen by governments, untouchable by thieves. Men with polished shoes and cold smiles would meet her intermediaries, believing they were dealing with a powerful syndicate. Never once did they imagine the mastermind was a quiet woman in a cardigan, stamping due dates by day and dismantling fortunes by night. Even now, in her 70s, Eleanor remembered the first time she was called the Raven. It had been at a clandestine auction in Paris. She wasn't present, of course. She never was. But her agent relayed the words back to her. A rival, furious after losing a bid, had spat, "That damn Raven strikes again. Who is she?" Eleanor had laughed for the first time in years. The name stuck. But power did not come without cost. She had seen greed twist men into monsters. She had traded with collectors whose hands were stained by theft. She had learned to navigate betrayal, to trust no one but the books themselves. There were nights when the weight of her empire pressed on her chest until she could scarcely breathe. Still, she told herself it was necessary. Every dollar she made, every fortune she built in shadows, she tucked away not for herself, but for her daughter's future, and for something greater, something she had only begun to dream, a foundation to return books to children who had none. Back in the present, Eleanor unlocked the cabinet in the library's back room. Inside rested a small stack of manuscripts wrapped in cloth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped one, revealing parchment pages illuminated in gold leaf. The text was centuries old, carried across borders, once nearly lost to fire. To most, it was priceless art. To Eleanor, it was a promise. She traced the edge of the script and whispered to the silence, "You are safe now." The clock ticked. The library was nearly empty. Closing the manuscript gently, she locked the cabinet again and returned to her desk. To any passer-by, she was just an old librarian working late, but in her mind she saw the black wings of the Raven spread wide across the world. One day, she thought, her family would learn who she was. One day they would see that Auntie Eleanor was never a shadow. For now, the secret remained hers alone, hidden in the stacks where empires were built from ink and silence. Q. The long dining table gleamed beneath a chandelier's warm glow, silver cutlery catching the light as dishes of roasted duck, stir-fried greens and jasmine rice filled the air with comforting aromas. The Chen family had always gathered this way, loud, busy, overlapping voices like waves crashing against the shore. Eleanor sat near the middle this time instead of the far end. Her brother had insisted, patting the chair beside him. "Closer, Eleanor. Your family. Don't hide away." She had smiled and obeyed. Though the words felt hollow, it was true. She was family, but not one they ever truly saw. The chatter swelled as wine glasses clinked. Her nieces compared vacation plans, her nephews bragged about business deals, and the younger ones tapped at their phones beneath the table. Eleanor listened quietly, her hands folded, her chopsticks resting neatly across her bowl. She was about to retreat into the silence of her thoughts when the front door opened and a late guest entered. The room stilled. "Forgive my intrusion," said a tall man in a dark suit, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. His voice carried weight, the kind people recognized instinctively. "I simply couldn't let this evening pass without extending my gratitude." The family looked around in confusion. Gratitude? For what? The man approached Eleanor. He stopped before her chair and with great reverence bowed his head. "Miss Chen," he said softly, "the Raven has saved my museum's collection. I came tonight to thank her personally." The words cracked the air like glass shattering. Forks froze mid-air. Glasses trembled. One of her nieces gasped aloud, a sharp sound that pierced the stunned silence. A nephew's wine glass slipped from his hand, tumbling to the floor and breaking into shards. Eleanor felt her pulse thrum in her throat. For a brief dizzy moment she considered denying it. She could smile and shake her head, pretend it was a mistake, dismiss the man as confused, but she didn't. She looked up, meeting the museum director's eyes with steady calm, and placed her hand over his in quiet acknowledgement. "Your collection belongs to the world," she said, her voice soft but certain. "It was never mine to hoard." Around her, the silence deepened. Her nieces and nephews stared as though she had grown wings at the table. Their quiet, boring Auntie Eleanor, the one who stamped books, who everyone forgot to pour wine for, was the raven. Her eldest niece was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Auntie, you're saying you are the raven?" "Yes." Eleanor's words were steady, but her chest ached with the weight of years unspoken. "The world may have known me by that name, but I have always been myself." Shock rippled down the table. Some leaned closer, incredulous. Others leaned back, suspicion hardening in their eyes. The greedy ones, the ones who had always measured worth in currency rather than kindness, already began calculating what her hidden empire might mean for them. The museum director bowed again before leaving, his duty done. The door shut, and the family was left to the echo of revelation. A nephew broke the silence with a forced laugh. "So what does this mean?" "You're secretly rich, Auntie, hiding treasure from your own family." The accusation stung, but Eleanor did not flinch. She picked up her chopsticks, placed a bite of rice in her mouth, and chewed with deliberate calm. Finally she set them down and looked around the table. Her eyes, gentle but firm, swept across the faces she had raised, the children she had fed, the family who had dismissed her as invisible for decades. "Knowledge is wealth," she said quietly, "but kindness is the greater treasure." Some lowered their gazes in shame, others rolled their eyes, unwilling to believe, yet a few, just a few, leaned forward with something new in their expression, respect. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt their eyes truly on her. She was no longer invisible, no longer a shadow. She was Eleanor Chen, librarian, widow, mother, and the raven. And she knew, in that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the family dinner, the Chen household was restless. The revelation had settled over everyone like a storm cloud that refused to drift away. By breakfast, whispers had already begun. "She can't really be the raven," muttered her niece Lillian, stirring her tea with unnecessary force. "It's absurd. Aunt Eleanor can barely keep up with her old Nokia phone, let alone international dealings." "She admitted it," said another, voice sharp. "You saw the museum director." Why would he bow to her if it wasn't true? Greedy silence followed, a silence filled with numbers, with the weight of inheritance. Eleanor herself sat in the garden, away from their mutterings. The morning sunlight streamed over her as she trimmed dead petals from her roses. Her hands were steady, though inside she felt the tremor of something unraveling. She had always known this day might come. Secrets, no matter how carefully kept, had a way of surfacing, but she had not expected it to come at the hands of her own blood. How quickly their eyes had changed from surprise to calculation. By noon, her nephew Victor came to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and ambitious, the kind of man who treated life as a chessboard, people as pieces. He approached with false warmth. "Auntie," he said, crouching slightly to meet her at the garden bench, "I just want to say how proud I am. Really. Who would have thought? My own aunt, this legendary raven. Incredible Eleanor clipped another petal, let it fall. Pride is a dangerous thing, Victor. Be careful with it. He laughed, brushing off her words. No, I mean it. But you must realize you can't do this alone anymore. Not at your age. The world's a dangerous place for someone with assets. You should let me help. I have contacts. I can protect what you've built. Eleanor finally looked at him, her dark eyes calm. Protect or possess? Victor's smile faltered. He recovered quickly, but Eleanor had seen the flicker. She had spent a lifetime reading men like him, ambitious, greedy, cloaked in false concern. I don't need protection, she said simply. Not from you. Not from anyone. His jaw tightened. He stood, straightening his suit jacket. Don't be stubborn, Auntie. Empires fall when their rulers grow old and weak. You don't want everything you've worked for to slip through your fingers. Eleanor's hands paused over the roses. She thought of fire, theft, betrayal, the many ways she had seen fortunes vanish in the rare manuscript world. He wasn't wrong, but his tone was. Empires built on fear fall, she said softly, but empires built on knowledge endure. Victor frowned, unable to read her. He left without another word. That night, Eleanor sat by her desk, the lamplight glowing over her papers. She had already begun to move assets, shifting accounts, placing funds where greedy hands could not reach. She wrote letters in careful script, her will drafted with clear conditions. Every dollar her family might touch would be tied to service, to giving, to building something greater than themselves. Her hand paused. She thought of her late husband, of his words long ago. When you give them knowledge, give them your heart, but keep your soul safe. She whispered into the empty room, I am trying. But greed is a seed that grows quickly. Over the following weeks, Eleanor noticed the subtle shifts. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. Questions about her schedule asked too casually. Whispers about inheritance and trusts. One afternoon she overheard two nieces arguing in the kitchen. She owes us, said one bitterly. She kept all that money secret while we struggled. Owes us, the other snapped. She doesn't owe us a cent. She raised half of us when our parents couldn't. She gave up her life for this family. If anything, we owe her. The argument died when Eleanor entered, but the words lingered in her chest like stones. Late at night, as the library closed and the city quieted, Eleanor unlocked her private cabinet. She unwrapped a manuscript, an illuminated book of hours, its colours still bright after 5 centuries. She traced the page, her hands trembling. These books never betrayed me, she whispered, but blood always does. She thought of Victor's eyes sharp with hunger. She thought of her nieces, divided between admiration and resentment. Her empire had been her shield, her triumph, her secret life, but now it was becoming her family's temptation, and deep in her bones, Eleanor knew. Betrayal was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. The first brick was laid on a grey morning in early spring. Eleanor stood at the edge of a dusty lot, wrapped in her long wool coat, as workers shouted instructions and machinery growled. The city had given her permission to transform this abandoned space into a library, the first building of the Chen Literacy Foundation. It wasn't grand, not yet, just piles of stone and steel, but to Eleanor it was more beautiful than any mansion, more valuable than any bank vault. This was her legacy taking form. She closed her eyes and imagined it, shelves stacked with books, children laughing, the smell of paper and ink filling the air, a place where no child would ever feel as she once had, lost, alone, clutching words in silence because no one else could hear them. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. When she announced her plans to the family, the reactions were swift. At Sunday dinner, she placed a thin folder on the table. "I am founding a literacy program," she told them, her voice steady. "We will build libraries, sponsor scholarships, bring books to those who cannot afford them. I want you to join me." Her younger niece, Anna, leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Auntie, that's wonderful. I'd love to help. What do you need me to do?" But across the table, Victor scoffed. "A literacy program? With all due respect, Auntie, that sounds like a waste of resources. You could be building businesses, real investments. Why pour money into dusty books?" "Because books saved me," Eleanor said quietly. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words silenced even the clink of cutlery. "And they will save others." Lillian rolled her eyes. "It's noble, sure, but you're asking us to volunteer." "I don't have time for charity work." Eleanor met her gaze with calm steel. "Then you will have no time for my inheritance." The table froze. She let the words settle before continuing. "Any member of this family who wishes to benefit from my trust must give their hands to the foundation. Literacy is the condition. Knowledge is the price." Victor leaned back in his chair, lips tightening. "So you mean to control us, even after you're gone?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "I mean to free you. You just don't see it yet." Days later, as construction continued, Eleanor visited a small community center where the foundation had already donated its first books. She watched from the doorway as children gathered around a table, eyes wide, as volunteers read aloud. One little girl clutched a battered copy of Charlotte's Web, her lips moving as she traced each word. Her mother stood nearby, wiping tears from her cheeks. "She hasn't stopped reading since the books arrived," the woman whispered. "It's like she's found herself." Eleanor felt something stir deep in her chest. For years she had built her empire in shadows, amassing wealth that no one could see. Yet here, in this small room filled with children's laughter, she felt truly rich for the first time. This was what it had all been for. But back at home, resentment simmered. Victor began making phone calls late at night, whispering into his phone in the garage. Lillian spoke to her cousins about how unfair Eleanor was being, how she was dangling money like bait. Some of the younger relatives, torn between admiration and greed, began avoiding family dinners altogether. Eleanor noticed it all. She always noticed. But she also saw Anna arriving at the construction site after work, rolling up her sleeves to help stack donated books. She saw her quiet nephew, Daniel, volunteering at the literacy classes, reading patiently to children who stumbled over words. The family was dividing, some pulled toward light, others swallowed by shadow. One evening, as Eleanor sat by her desk, writing letters for the foundation, Anna came in carrying a stack of files. "We've already had 50 applications for scholarships," she said, breathlessly. "50, Auntie? That's 50 lives you're about to change." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling. She reached out, brushing a stray hair from Anna's face. "Not me, child. This legacy will be yours as much as mine." For a moment she felt hope bloom inside her, fragile but radiant. Perhaps, despite the whispers of greed, some of them understood. Perhaps not all was lost. But as the wind rattled the window panes that night, Eleanor couldn't shake the shadow pressing at the edges of her thoughts. She knew greed was patient, like a seed planted deep, and Victor, ambitious, restless Victor, was watering it daily. Still she chose hope. She had to, because even if her family betrayed her, the children never would. And in their voices, clear, stumbling, joyous, she had already found her true empire. It began with whispers, as betrayals often do. Eleanor first sensed it not in words, but in the silence that followed her into rooms. A glance too quickly averted, a phone call cut short when she entered. Her instincts, sharpened by decades of quiet observation among rare books and rarer men, told her something was shifting, but it was Anna who brought her the truth. "Auntie," Anna said one evening, her voice tight, "you need to know what Victor's been doing." They sat in Eleanor's study, the lamplight golden against the shelves of manuscripts. Eleanor's hands paused over a letter she had been drafting. "Tell me." Anna hesitated, then set a folder on the desk. "He's been reaching out to donors, pretending to represent the foundation. He's telling them you're too old to manage things properly, that the Chen Literacy Foundation would be better under his leadership." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "And the donors listened?" "Some did," Anna admitted. "Others were suspicious. A few even called the foundation office to ask why Victor Chen was suddenly co-director." She swallowed hard. "Auntie, he's trying to take it from you." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of Anna's words pressing down on her chest. She had expected resistance, she had expected greed, but she had not expected Victor to strike so boldly, so soon. The confrontation came at Sunday dinner. Eleanor waited until the plates were set down, and the chatter rose. She studied Victor across the table, his sharp suit, his restless fingers drumming against his glass. His smile was too thin, too rehearsed. Finally, she set her fork down. "Victor," she said quietly, but the authority in her tone silenced the room. "I understand you've been speaking on behalf of my foundation." Victor didn't flinch. He leaned back, arms folding over his chest. "Someone had to, Auntie. You can't run everything forever. People want stability, a future. You should be grateful I'm stepping up, stepping up." Eleanor's voice was ice. "You are attempting a theft. Do not dress greed in the robes of duty." His smile vanished. "It isn't greed to protect the family's interests. You're pouring millions into libraries for strangers, while your blood, your own kin, are left waiting for scraps." Across the table, Anna bristled. "That's not what this is about, Victor, and you know it. Stay out of this," he snapped at her, before turning back to Eleanor. "You built something incredible, Auntie. I'll admit it. But it's time you pass the torch. You're old. People will start to wonder if you're in control of your faculties. Do you want them whispering that you've lost touch with reality?" The words hit harder than a slap. Eleanor's hands curled around the edge of the table. For a moment, she saw herself as Victor painted her, an old woman, fragile, clinging to dreams. But then she remembered the children reading in the community center, the girl tracing words with trembling fingers. She remembered their laughter, their hope. That was reality, not his greed. Her voice when it came was quiet but unyielding. "I may be old, Victor, but I am not weak, and I am not finished." Victor's eyes narrowed, his face hardening. "Then don't be surprised if others disagree." He stood, the chair scraping harshly against the floor, and stormed out, leaving silence in his wake. That night, Eleanor sat alone by the window, the city lights glittering like scattered jewels. She had built her empire in shadows, but now her enemy wore her family's face. She felt the weight of years pressing heavier than ever. For the first time, a question crept into her mind, unwelcome and sharp. Had she made a mistake by tying her legacy to her blood? A knock at the door broke her reverie. Anna stepped in, her eyes full of concern. "Don't let him take this from you, Auntie. The foundation is yours. The children need it. I'll fight with you, no matter what." Eleanor reached for her niece's hand, gripping it tightly. "Then we fight together. But remember, child, betrayal is like fire. It consumes everything in its path. Victor has lit the match. Now we must be ready for the flames." She turned back to the window, her reflection staring back at her. Not just an old woman, not just a librarian. The raven was awake again, and this time the empire she guarded was not gold or manuscripts, but the fragile burning light of hope itself. The winter wind howled against Eleanor's windows as she sat in her reading chair, a blanket drawn tightly over her knees. The doctors had been gentle but firm. Her heart was failing. She had perhaps months, maybe less. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the weight of her own fragility. She had always believed she could outwit time with wisdom and patience, but no empire, not even one built of books, could withstand the silence of death forever. Her greatest sorrow was not her own end, but what she might leave unfinished. The library stood, but the foundation was fragile. Some families still resented her, others were uncertain. One evening, she walked alone through the half-completed library. Dust clung to her shoes as she moved between empty shelves. She pressed her hand against the cold brick wall and whispered, "Don't let me leave you unfinished." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, the raven felt powerless. The family gathered after hearing the news of her declining health. Victor came first, his expression masked with false sympathy. "Auntie," he said smoothly, "you shouldn't burden yourself with all this. Let me take over. You'll have peace in your final days." Eleanor fixed her sharp eyes on him. "Peace? Or silence?" "There's a difference." Victor Anna spoke next, her voice trembling but firm. "We know what you're trying to do, Victor. This isn't about helping her. It's about control." The room split in two, those siding with Victor, whispering about money and inheritance, and those who looked at Eleanor with love and sorrow. Eleanor raised her frail hand, silencing them. "Enough. This is not about wealth or power or who controls the name Chen. This is about what endures when we are gone. Will you be remembered for greed or for giving?" Her words cut deeper than anger. For a moment, even Victor looked away. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's health worsened. She could no longer climb the stairs without Anna's arm to steady her. Yet her mind was still sharp, her spirit unbroken. She spent her last strength writing letters, one to Anna, urging her to carry on the foundation, one to each of her nieces and nephews, offering not money but wisdom, memories, and a challenge. Build, don't consume. Her most precious letter, however, she left sealed in the cornerstone of the library. "For the children who come after," it read, "may you find in these walls not just books, but the courage to dream. Knowledge is wealth, but kindness is the greater treasure." On her final visit to the nearly finished library, she pressed a small wooden box into Anna's hands. Inside lay the ledger of the raven, records of her trades, her secrets, her fortune. "Use it wisely," Eleanor whispered, "not for power, but for light." Anna wept as she embraced her aunt. It was the last time she would hear her voice. The morning Eleanor passed, the sky was a pale grey. The the kind she had always loved. She was found in her chair by the window, a book open in her lap, her glasses still perched on her nose. She had gone quietly, as if slipping into another story. The funeral was small but filled with faces, family, foundation members, children clutching books. Anna stood at the front, her hands trembling, as she read Eleanor's words aloud. Wealth fades, names fade, but the gift of reading once given cannot be taken away. That is immortality enough. Even Victor, standing in the back, looked shaken. For the first time he seemed to realize that no amount of money could make a room weep for him the way it wept for her. Weeks later the library opened. A bronze plaque bore Eleanor Chen's name, not as the Raven, not as a millionaire, but as Auntie Eleanor, who believed in books and in us. Children ran through the halls, voices bright. Anna smiled through her tears, knowing the empire Eleanor had built was not hidden any more. It lived in every page turned, in every child who dared to dream. The Raven was gone, but Eleanor Chen was eternal.